The first sound came from behind 18 feet of solid rock. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. The mine inspector raised his hammer and repeated the pattern. Whatever was inside the mountain answered immediately. Same rhythm, same force, same pause between the final 2 knocks. There was only one problem. According to every survey, every drilling record, and every geological scan, there was nothing behind that wall. No abandoned shaft, no natural cavity, not even enough empty space for a hand. Weeks later, the inspector found a room that should not have existed. In its center stood an iron chair. Carved into the metal was his full name and a date that had not happened yet. Tonight, we are going to cross 3 boundaries that were never meant to be crossed. Deep beneath the Ozarks, a mine inspector will hear something, learn his voice, copy his footsteps, and slowly remove one of his co-workers from reality. Hundreds of millions of miles away, a NASA analyst will discover an object moving toward Earth. The signal it broadcasts is unmistakably artificial, but every scientist who studies it soon begins repeating the same sentence. There is nothing unusual to investigate. And in a laboratory built to conquer time, a volunteer will travel millions of years into the future, only to find something waiting in the darkness at the end of the universe. We tell ourselves that distance keeps us safe, that the things buried beneath mountains cannot reach the surface, that the objects between planets are too far away to notice us, that whatever survives at the end of time could never know our names. But perhaps distance was never protecting us from them. Perhaps it was protecting them from us. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and if you hear knocking from somewhere inside your wall, do not answer it. It may not be asking to come in. It may be checking whether you are still there. This is night evidence. Story 1. I inspected mine tunnels for 5 years. There are some things beneath the Ozarks that should stay buried. The name's Malichi, but almost everyone calls me Kai. From 2014 until the fall of 2019, I inspected underground mines. Most people hear mine inspector and picture someone wearing a hard hat while walking through tunnels with a clipboard. That's not entirely wrong, but it leaves out most of the job. I inspected active limestone mines, underground storage facilities, and old tunnels beneath properties where someone wanted to build a house, road, or commercial building. Sometimes I worked up to 1,000 feet underground. Other times, I crawled through openings barely wide enough for my shoulders because a farmer had discovered a hole in his pasture and wanted to know whether his cattle were going to disappear into it, or a wolf's den. My job was to identify unstable roof conditions, failed supports or beams, dangerous gases, flooding, and any evidence that the ground above might collapse. The equipment I carried consisted usually of a gas monitor, measuring tape, camera, marking paint, and a 20-ounce scaling hammer. The hammer was used to tap the roof and walls of a tunnel. Solid rock usually produces a sharp, clean sound. Loose rock sounded hollow and sometimes echoes. You learned to hear the difference quickly. You also learned that not every hollow sound came from loose rock, but we can chat about that later. I didn't grow up wanting to inspect mines. I grew up near Fredericktown. My father worked maintenance at a limestone quarry, and 2 of my uncles spent most of their adult lives in the lead belt. Underground work was just something people did. My father hated that I followed him into it. He didn't expect me to be a doctor, but he sure didn't want me working the mines. He once told me, "The ground didn't care whether you were a good person, whether you had children, or whether someone was waiting for you at home. It only has to make one mistake," he said, You have to be correct every day. At the time, I thought he was talking about cave-ins. Now, though, I'm not so sure. I began working for a private geological company in June 2014, close to the silver mine that you can find in between Ironton and Junction City. We contracted with mine operators, insurance companies, and property owners. I was 25 at the time, recently married, and convinced that my associate's degree made me smarter than the others who had spent 30 years underground. It took about 3 weeks for that attitude to fade. My first supervisor was a man named Dale. Dale was 58 when I met him. He had a gray mustache, a permanent limp, and hands that looked like they had been carved from old wood. He had worked in mines since the late 70s, a no-nonsense kind of guy. He didn't tell ghost stories. That was important. Most miners did. They talked about Tommyknockers, moving lights, and dead men tapping from behind the walls. Most of it was something to pass the time. Dale never participated. If someone mentioned hearing voices in an empty heading, he blamed the ventilation. I'll try and explain terms that I'll be using. A heading in a mine refers to a tunnel that's been driven through to reach a mineral deposit. It allows miners to access ore and set up further workings. If someone saw a light where no light should have been, he called it a reflection. If equipment moved by itself, he said someone had forgotten where they left it. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. The first strange thing happened less than a month after I started. July 2014. We were inspecting an abandoned limestone mine, a small town called Edina. The mine had closed sometime in the early 90s, and a company was considering using part of it for underground document storage. Old limestone mines are often shaped like enormous grids. The miners remove sections of rock while leaving large pillars behind to support the roof. Some chambers are wide enough to drive several trucks side by side. The mine was dry, stable, and boring. That was exactly what we wanted. That was our favorite. Dale and I had been underground for about 2 hours when we reached the northern end. According to the map, the workings ended at a solid wall of limestone. Dale marked our location while I checked the roof. I struck it with my hammer. Sharp, solid. I struck the wall a second time. Sharp. I moved a few feet to the right and struck it a third time. 3 knocks answered from the other side. I lowered my hammer. Dale looked up from the map. "What? Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" I hit the wall again. 3 strikes. We waited. 3 knocks came back. They were evenly spaced. Dale walked over and put his palm against the limestone. "Probably another heading behind it," I said. "No way." He checked the map. "There's nothing behind this wall but 60 feet of rock." I hit the wall once. 1 knock answered. Twice. 2 knocks. I smiled nervously. Somebody's screwing with us. Dale grabbed the hammer from my hand impatiently. He hit the wall 5 times in an uneven pattern. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock. The answer came immediately. It repeated the exact pattern. Dale didn't smile. He handed the hammer back to me. "We're done with this section." "What do you think it is?" "Water." "That doesn't sound like water." "Then it's rock." He started walking away. I followed. As we reached the next intersection, 5 more knocks came from somewhere behind us. The same pattern. Dale never mentioned it again. I did tell my father, though. He listened quietly and then asked where the mine was located. When I told him, he said, "Don't knock on things if you ain't know what's knocking back." I laughed. He didn't. His eyes seemed to pierce through me as my laugh faded. Underground, sound travels through stone, vanishes into open chambers, and returns from impossible directions. For months, that was how I explained the knocking. In February 2015, Dale and I were sent to inspect an old lead mine in St. Francois County, somewhere close to Farmington. The mine had been closed for years, decades. A landowner had discovered water flowing from an old drainage tunnel and was worried that the workings extended beneath his property. Collapses are often the culprit. We entered through a horizontal opening cut into the side of a hill. The tunnel was narrower compared to the limestone mines I had been inside. Timber supports lined portions of the passage, although most of them had rotted or collapsed. The air smelled like wet clay and rust. We were only supposed to travel about 800 feet before reaching a flooded section. At 600 feet, we found fresh boot prints. The prints were deep and sharply defined in the mud, as if they were just created. Someone had walked farther into the mine. No prints came back out. Dale crouched beside them to get a better look. "Could be the property owner," I said. "He said he's ain't never been inside." "Kids?" "Maybe." We followed the tracks deeper. They were made by an old-style work boot with a wide heel. The person had taken unusually long steps, as if they'd been running. The prints continued until the tunnel ended at a pool of black water. They went directly into it. I shined my light across the surface. The water filled the passage from wall to wall. "Maybe there's a ledge," I said. Dale shook his head. The old mine map showed that the tunnel dropped nearly 30 feet beyond that point. Anyone who walked into the water would have disappeared almost immediately. We called the landowner and asked whether anyone was missing in the towns. No one was reported to have been missing to his recollection. The sheriff's department sent 2 deputies and a dive team. They found no body. They also found no footprints near the entrance, except ours. According to them, the tracks began nearly 500 feet inside the mine. The official explanation was that they were old prints preserved by the stable conditions underground. That was possible. What wasn't possible were that the prints were filling slowly with water while we watched. Later that year, I started hearing the footsteps. They didn't happen in every mine I was in. They usually occurred in older mines where the air was still and there was no active equipment. I would be walking with Dale or another inspector and hear someone behind us. A slow, dragging step, another step. If we stopped, it stopped. If we continued, it followed. Whenever I turned around, the tunnel was empty. The first few times, I assumed it was an echo. Then, during an inspection near Joplin, I heard the footsteps while standing still. This was a first. Dale and I had stopped to examine a fractured support pillar. Something approached from the darkness behind us. Step, drag, step, drag. It was moving slowly, but it was definitely getting closer. Dale stared through me. "Keep your light forward," he said. "Why?" "Just do it." The footsteps continued. Step, drag, step, drag. Small stones slid behind us. I felt the muscles in my back tighten like a torqued screw. "Is someone there?" I yelled. The footsteps stopped. Dale closed his eyes. From the darkness, my own voice answered. "Is someone there?" It sounded far away, but it was undoubtedly me. The words echoed through the tunnel. Then the footsteps began moving again, faster this time. Dale grabbed my arm and pushed me toward the exit. We didn't run, because running underground is how people trip, crack skulls, or fall into holes they didn't see. Mines are notoriously dark, but we walked as swiftly as we could. The footsteps followed for nearly 10 minutes. When we reached daylight, Dale made me stay outside while he stood at the entrance. "What are you doing?" I asked. Listening. For what? He didn't answer. After several minutes, he stepped away from the opening. On the drive back, he spoke up. Never answer something underground unless you can see who you're talking to. That was an echo. No. You think somebody was following us? No. Then what was it? Dale looked through the windshield. I don't know. That was the first time I ever heard him admit that. My wife noticed changes in me before I did. Her name was Kelsey. We had been married for just over 2 years when she told me I had started talking in my sleep. I asked what I said during my dreams. You count, she replied. Count what? I don't know. You get to 50 or 60 and start over. I laughed and told her it was probably because I spent all day measuring tunnels. A few weeks later, she woke me by turning on the bedroom light. I was standing beside the wall with one hand pressed against it. What are you doing? She asked. I had no idea. The wall separated our bedroom from the hallway. I told her I must have been sleepwalking. She stared at my hand. My knuckles were bleeding. There were 3 small dents in the drywall. In 2016, our company received a contract to document abandoned workings beneath a property in the Ozarks. The landowner planned to build cabins near an old mine opening. Nobody knew exactly what had been mined there. Some records described it as an iron prospect. Others called it a lead exploration tunnel. We relied on rumors. The main passage extended straight into a ridge. It was barely 6 feet high and wide enough for one person at a time. Dale stayed outside because his bad knee had been bothering him. I entered with another inspector named Ryan. Ryan was younger than me and had worked for the company for about 6 months. About 400 feet inside, we found a side tunnel that wasn't shown on any of the available maps. It had been sealed with stacked rocks. The wall had partially collapsed, leaving an opening near the top. Cold air flowed through the gap. Ryan shined his light inside. Looks open to me. We're not supposed to enter undocumented areas. We're supposed to document them. He had a point, although I didn't like it. We removed several loose rocks and widened the opening. The tunnel beyond was different from the rest of the mine. The main passage had been drilled and blasted. This means that the drill rigs drilled the walls and then blasted with explosives. They were irregular and scarred with tool marks. The hidden tunnel had smooth walls, not perfectly smooth, but rounded, almost polished. The floor sloped downward. We crawled through. After about 50 feet, the passage widened into a circular chamber. In the center stood an iron chair. That's the best way I can describe it. It looked handmade. Thick metal plates had been welded together to form a seat, back, and 4 short legs. Leather straps hung from the armrests. Ryan laughed nervously. What the hell? I took several photographs. We would normally take pictures for a few reasons. One is for safety and training. The second is for documentation and progress tracking. There were scratches on the floor around the chair, like someone had dragged it repeatedly across the chamber. The walls were covered in names. Some were carved deeply into the rock. Others appeared to have been written in charcoal. Most were too faded to read. Not all of them. Ryan walked around the chair. Don't touch it, I said. I'm not. He leaned closer. There's something underneath. Bolted to the bottom of the seat was a metal plate. Ryan read it aloud. Malichi. I thought he was joking. What? He pointed. My full first name had been engraved into the metal. Not Kai. Malichi. The spelling was correct. People usually spelt it as Maliki. My mother had used an I because she liked the way it looked. Ryan knew me only as Kai. "Did Dale put you up to this?" I asked. Ryan stepped away. "I didn't do that." I crouched beside the chair. Below my name was a date. September 19th, 2019. At the time, that was more than 3 years away. I took a photograph. The camera flashed. Something moved in the tunnel behind us. A shadow crossed the opening. Ryan turned. "Dale?" No one answered. Our radios produced only static. Then a man began humming somewhere deeper inside the mine. It was a song my dad used to sing while working on cars. I hadn't heard it since I was a kid. I stood so fast that I hit my head on the low ceiling. "Time to go." Ryan didn't argue. We climbed through the opening and replaced the rocks. When we reached the entrance, Dale was sitting on the hood of the truck. He asked why we had been underground for almost 4 hours. I checked my watch. We had entered the hidden tunnel at 10:16 a.m. It was now after 2 p.m. It had felt like 15 minutes. I showed Dale the photographs. The chamber was visible. The chair was visible. But the metal plate beneath it was blank. My name and the date had disappeared. We returned the following morning with the property owner. The side tunnel was no longer there. The wall where we had originally found, it was solid stone. No stacked rocks. Solid, unbroken rock. Ryan quit 2 weeks later. He never told me why, but I had my suspicions. I tried contacting him several years ago, but his phone number had been disconnected. I couldn't find him online. According to one of our former co-workers, Ryan's family claimed he had never worked in mining. They said he had been a school teacher. I still have photographs of him wearing our company uniform. At least, I did. When I checked recently, he was missing from most of them. There were empty spaces where he had been standing, but the gaps were noticeable. Around 2017, I had become a senior field inspector. The promotion came with better pay, a company truck, and the responsibility of training new inspectors. I stopped talking about the eerie things. I learned that from Dale. I didn't mention the footsteps. I didn't tell anyone about the chair. I didn't explain why I refused to enter a mine alone. The job was dangerous enough without people thinking I was unstable. Most inspections remained completely normal. I saw roof collapses, flooded mine shafts, and equipment abandoned so long that tree roots had grown through it. I found animal bones, rusted tools, and old lunch tins. Once, I found a newspaper from 1951 that looked as like it had been left there the day before. Another time, we discovered an underground room containing hundreds of glass jars filled with a cloudy and peculiar liquid. We notified the police and left them alone. They turned out to be homemade mineral samples. There was mostly an explanation. Mostly. In August 2017, 4 of us inspected a working limestone mine after the day crew had left. Allison, our structural engineer, repeatedly saw a 5th light following us between the pillars, the yellow flame of an obsolete carbide lamp. Control confirmed that only 4 people were underground. Before leaving, we posed for a group photograph. The image showed 5 people. A man in dirty coveralls and an old metal helmet stood behind me with one hand on my shoulder. Dale later showed me a photograph from 1978. The same man stood behind a younger Dale in the same pose. Dale called him the Counter. He appeared whenever there was one more person underground than there should have been. In 1978, the person who failed to return was Dale's brother. Dale gave me one warning: never be the last person out. For the next 2 years, I never was. The fear followed me home. My wife found me walking through the house with a flashlight, counting rooms and tapping the basement wall with a hammer. Our marriage ended. After she left, I heard the dragging footsteps in stores, parking garages, and the hallway outside my apartment. Whenever I turned, no one was there. In May 2018, Dale retired. I knew I was alone for real this time. There was no ceremony. He cleared his desk on a Friday afternoon and left his hard hat hanging on the wall. Before he went, he gave me his scaling hammer. It was old, with a leather-wrapped handle worn smooth by decades of use. "You'll need this more than I will," he said. I asked him why he had decided to retire. He looked toward the empty hallway outside the office. "I started hearing my brother." "Underground?" "No." He left before I could ask anything else. Our final project together had been an inspection of an abandoned mine called Black Hollow. That wasn't its official name, but every local called it Black Hollow. The mine was located on private land. A logging company had discovered several sinkholes near an access road and wanted to know whether the old workings were collapsing. Very little documentation existed. This is pretty normal. The mine appeared briefly on a state map from the 1920s and vanished from later records. We entered through a partially collapsed drift near the bottom of a ravine. The passage continued straight for nearly 2,500 feet. That part was unusual. Exploration mines normally led toward promising mineral deposits. Black Hollow had been driven directly beneath the ridge without any obvious effort to follow ore. The tunnel walls were covered in small square recesses. Each was about 5 inches deep. Some contained rusted nails and bolt anchors. Others contained scraps of cloth, animal teeth, or small bundles of hair tied with string. I photographed everything. Dale didn't. He walked with his eyes fixed on the floor. "What were these for?" I asked. "Not sure." "You've been here before." He stopped. "How do you know that?" "You recognized the entrance." Dale looked back the way we had come. "I was here once." "When?" 1978. "With your brother?" He nodded. "What happened?" "We entered through a different opening. There's only one entrance, though. There was another back then." The tunnel ended at a vertical shaft. We couldn't see the bottom. Cold air rose from it, carrying the smell of soil after rain. There was a steel ladder attached to the wall. It looked new. The bolts showed no rust. "Did your former crew install that?" I asked. "No." I shined my light down the shaft. 150 meters. The ladder continued beyond the reach of the beam. Something climbed beneath us. The rungs vibrated. A faint, metallic ringing echoed from below. I stepped away from the edge. "Who else is down here?" "No one." The climbing continued, slow and steady. Dale lifted his hammer. The top of a helmet appeared in the darkness. It was an old metal mining helmet, the same kind worn by the man in the photographs. Dale grabbed my jacket. We ran. Behind us, something pulled itself out of the shaft. I heard metal scrape against stone. Then the footsteps followed. Step, drag, step, drag. As we neared the entrance, Dale began shouting his brother's name. "Eddie!" The footsteps stopped immediately. A man answered from deep inside the mine. "Dale?" The voice echoed what seemed like an hour. Dale turned. I grabbed him. "That isn't your brother." "Dale!" the voice called again. I found the way out. Dale wrestled with me. It took everything I had to keep him moving. We reached daylight. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Dale looked at me and said, "Don't ever go back in there." I promised I wouldn't. In September 2019, I broke that promise. The logging company had begun clearing land above Black Hollow. A section of access road collapsed, leaving a hole almost 30 feet across. Our company was asked to determine whether the rest of the road was safe. I refused the assignment. My manager reminded me that I was the senior inspector and the only current employee who had entered the mine previously. I told him to find someone else. He said the company would lose the contract. I still refused. The next morning, Allison called me. I hadn't worked with her since the mine where we saw the fifth light. She had been hired as the project engineer for the job. "I heard you're afraid of this one," she said. "I'm not afraid." "Then what's the problem?" "The mine is unstable. That's why we inspect it." "You don't understand." "Then explain it." I tried. I told her about the shaft, the old helmet, the voice that sounded like Dale's brother. Allison listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You know Dale had early-stage dementia when he retired." I didn't know that, nor believed it. He was confusing places and dates. He probably told you stories that weren't accurate. I listened. I heard the voice. Sound travels underground. I saw someone climbing the ladder. You saw a helmet. You were there when we saw the fifth light. I saw a reflection. What about the photograph? Digital artifacts happen. I almost laughed. Why did you call me? Because I trust your judgment underground, even if I don't trust your explanation. She said the inspection team would include 4 people, myself and Allison, a safety technician named Rob, and a local surveyor named Thomas. I had heard about Thomas before. Thomasa was nearly 60 and had worked around mines his entire life. He knew nothing about my previous inspection. We entered Black Hollow on September 19th, 2019. The date engraved beneath the iron chair. I considered backing out when I realized it. I didn't. That decision has bothered me more than any other in my entire life. The mine looked exactly as I remembered. Same narrow passage, same square recesses in the walls, same bundles of hair. Thomas stopped repeatedly to examine them. "Memorial holes," he said. Memorial holes were created to commemorate a significant person, event, or loss. "What does that mean?" Allison asked. "Some old mining communities placed personal items underground after a death." "I've never heard of that." "Neither have I." He smiled, but no one else did. We placed monitoring equipment near the entrance and continued inward. At roughly 300 feet, Rob noticed boot prints in the dust, 4 different sets. They traveled towards us. "What time did the survey crew leave?" he asked. "There was no survey crew underground," Allison said. Thomas crouched by the tracks. "These are fresh." The 4 sets of prints matched our boots. I placed mine beside one. Same size, same tread pattern. The right heel even had the same missing section where a piece of rubber had torn away. The tracks belonged to us. They had been made before we arrived. They continued deeper into the mine. Allison tried to explain them as prints from our previous inspection. I reminded her that she hadn't been there, and I had worn different boots at the time. We followed the tracks. They led to the vertical shaft. The steel ladder was no longer there. A narrow bridge of rocks crossed the opening. The footprints continued over it. "I don't remember that being here," I said, as a thought back to that night. Allison looked at the map I had drawn in 2018. The tunnel ended at the shaft. "Absolutely." Thomas tested the stone bridge with his hammer. "It seems to be solid." He stepped onto it slowly. I began to grab his shoulder. "We don't know what's on the other side." That's why we're here. Tom's crossed. Rob followed him. Allison went third. I stood alone at the edge, trying to gather my thoughts. From the shaft, my own voice whispered, "Don't be the last person." I crossed swiftly. The passage continued beyond the shaft. The walls became more polished as we traveled. Eventually, the tool marks disappeared completely. The tunnel wasn't natural, but it didn't look mined either. It looked worn out, almost as if something gigantic moved through it back and forth for a very long time. The boot prints remained ahead of us, guiding us. After another 100 feet, we found a yellow survey mark painted on the wall. It was still wet. Thomas touched it. "That's my paint," he exclaimed. He double-checked the spray can that was on his belt. The cap was still sealed. Farther ahead, we found another marker. Then another. Each had been placed exactly where Thomas normally marked survey stations. The final mark read, "End of inspection." Below it included 4 vertical lines. Someone had crossed out the 4th. Rob turned towards me. "You've been here before." "No." "Then who made these?" I didn't answer. Allison raised her radio. The signal was filled with static. Then her own voice came through. "Station 7 is stable, moving to Station 8. Allison looked down at the radio. She hadn't transmitted anything. A second voice followed. Rob's. "I can hear something ahead." Then came the warning. "Kai, don't let it count us." Thomas whispered. "What the hell?" The radio crackled again. My voice came through last. "Leave Allison." She stared at me. "What does that mean?" "I don't know." From farther down the tunnel, someone began screaming. It sounded like Allison. She was standing beside me. The scream came again. "Help me!" Allison lifted her light. "That's not possible." The voice called my name. "Kai!" I grabbed Allison's arm before she could move. The light appeared ahead of us. A yellow carbide flame floated in the darkness. Behind it stood 4 people, an inspection team. They were about 150 feet away, partly hidden by the curve of the tunnel. One wore a white hard hat like Allison. One carried a survey pole like Thomas. One had Rob's orange reflective vest. The 4th wore my jacket. They were facing away from us. Rob whispered, "That's us." The other team began walking. Their lights moved farther into the tunnel. Thomas raised his camera and snapped a picture. The flash illuminated the passage like a bolt of lightning. For that 1/10 of a second, the figures weren't facing away anymore. They were facing towards us. Their heads were lowered like the previous photos I saw. I couldn't see their faces, but I knew. The figure wearing my jacket had one hand resting on Allison's shoulder, the same way the counter had touched mine. I remembered Dale's warning begin speaking in my head. "Somebody doesn't come back." "We're leaving," I said. No one argued. We turned around. However, the stone bridge over the shaft was gone. The passage ended at the open pit. Allison looked at her map. "There's got to be another route." "There isn't." Rob shined his light across the shaft. The opposite side was 20 feet away, too far to jump. "We crossed here," Thomas said. "I know." The radio crackled. Dale's voice came through. "Kai." I froze. Dale had retired more than a year earlier. "Kai, I found the ladder." A light appeared below us, then another, then dozens. Small yellow flames moved in the shaft, like people climbing an invisible staircase. The metallic ringing began, coming toward us. Allison grabbed my sleeve. "What do we do?" I looked along the edge of the shaft. There was a narrow ledge on the right side. It might have been wide enough to cross if we pressed ourselves against the wall. Rob went first. Thomas followed. I told Allison to go next. She shook her head. You gotta go first. Something struck the wall beneath us. Dust began falling from the ceiling. The yellow lights grew larger. Allison stepped onto the ledge. Halfway across, she stopped. Kai? What? She was staring into the shaft. There's someone down there. Keep moving. It's me. A woman stood far below us. She wore Allison's white, hard hat. Her face was turned upward. Kai, the woman called. The voice came from both the shaft and the Allison beside me. The woman below lifted one arm. She was holding Dale's scaling hammer, the hammer Dale gave me during his retirement, the one attached to my belt. I touched it to make sure it was still there. It was. The Allison on the ledge stared back at me. What is she holding? Don't look at her. The woman below began climbing the wall. She didn't use a ladder. Her hands and feet pressed flat against the stone as she crawled upward. Allison screamed and hurried across. I followed her. The ledge crumbled beneath my final step. Rob caught my arm and pulled me onto the other side. We ran toward the entrance. The footsteps followed. Not one set. 4. Step, drag, step, drag. Our radios played different fragments of conversation. Some were things we had said earlier. Others hadn't happened yet. I heard Rob crying. Thomas was praying. Allison saying she couldn't find her face. Then my voice said, "We left the wrong one." The footsteps moved closer. At the memorial holes, Thomas suddenly stopped. "What are you doing?" I shouted. He pointed. Inside was a wallet. His wallet. He removed the one from his pocket. Both were identical. He opened the wallet from the wall. Inside was his driver's license. The photograph showed Thomas wearing the old metal mining helmet. A folded note was tucked behind it. Thomas read the note silently. His face went pale. Eyes glazed over. "What does it say?" Allison asked. He handed it to me. The note was written in my own handwriting. Thomas did not enter with us. I looked at Thomas. He backed away. "What is that supposed to mean?" I counted. Rob, Allison, Thomas, me, 4 people. Then I remembered when we arrived, Thomas was waiting at the site when I arrived. Allison had introduced him. Rob had shaken his hand. I had watched him put on his equipment. He had entered with us. Hadn't he? The footsteps stopped. A man spoke behind us. 3 came in. It was Dale's voice. Thomas stared into the darkness. That isn't true. 3 came in, the voice repeated. Allison began counting. Kai, Rob, me. She looked at Thomas. Her expression changed. Who are you? Thomas's face collapsed. Not physically, emotionally. He looked like a child who had been abandoned. You know me. No, Allison said. I don't. Rob raised his light. Where did he come from? Thomas grabbed my arm. Kai, you talked to me outside. I remembered it. We had been discussing his survey equipment. He had told me about his first mining job near Viburnum. I remembered everything. But the memories had started feeling borrowed, almost as if the stories had been told to me rather than things I had experienced. Thomas looked toward the mine entrance. Daylight was visible in the distance. He ran. The footsteps resumed. They ran with him. Thomas disappeared around the curve. We followed. When we reached the entrance, Thomas was gone. There was no sign of him outside the mine, no vehicle, no equipment, no boot prints. We called the sheriff's department right away. They searched the mine for 2 days. They found nothing. The company that hired our team denied employing a surveyor named Thomas. Allison had no memory of him. Neither did Rob. The photographs from the inspection showed only 3 people: me, Allison, Rob. In the photograph Thomas took of the figures ahead of us, 4 inspectors stood in the tunnel. One was me. One was Rob. One was Allison. The fourth wore an old metal helmet and looked toward the ground. His hand rested on Allison's shoulder. I resigned the following Monday. My manager offered me a leave of absence. 5 years was a long time in this current market. I told him I was finished. He asked whether my decision had anything to do with the Black Hollow inspection. I asked how many people had been on our team. He said 3. I haven't entered a mine since September 19th, 2019. Kai survived because he remembered what the others forgot. He remembered the fourth man. He remembered the footsteps. He remembered that the mine had changed the number of people who entered it. But the next witness faced something even more dangerous. Not a force that removed one person from memory, but a signal that could persuade an entire scientific community to ignore what was directly in front of them. This time, the darkness was not beneath the ground. It was moving between the planets. Story 2, I work at NASA, and everything is perfectly normal. I work in a small solar system group at NASA, and today is a perfectly normal day, like every other. My colleagues are standing around discussing the possibility of getting more telescope time. Our boss is generously making a pot of coffee for his underlings. The instant messenger channel is still captivated by yesterday's discovery of a large and sturdy cardboard box and the subsequent haggling over such a rare and priceless artifact. And I'm sitting at my desk, checking my emails, making small talk with my neighbors, and trying to conceal the fact that this is all utterly insane. People should be panicking. The press should be hammering at our door, demanding answers. Hell, the military should have taken over days ago, and I, for one, would have welcomed them with open arms. But instead, here I am, checking last month's expenses and wondering if $20 is too much to claim for lunch, all while trying very hard not to scream. It all started about a month ago. The first data from the Vera Rubin Observatory was trickling in, and we were running some of it through a new machine learning algorithm to see if it picked up anything. To our surprise, it did. Nothing spectacular, just an object, probably a small asteroid, orbiting among Jupiter's Trojans. But it was a lot brighter than its neighbors, as if it was made of something much more reflective. I would love to say at that point, we looked each other knowingly in the eyes, said, "Aliens," and got on a direct line to the White House. But we are all too old and jaded for that. No, instead we merely agreed that it looked unusual enough for further attention, scheduled a more detailed look, and went to lunch. Skip forward a couple of weeks, and we're standing around a monitor looking at data from a large telescope. And while no one was saying anything out loud, by now we were all most definitely thinking aliens. Or at least I was. That and what I was going to spend my Nobel Prize money on. And for good reason. Not to get all technical, but the damn thing was shinier than a disco ball. And what's more, we could tell from the periodic way it glinted that it was regular in shape. Far too regular to be a normal asteroid. Now, I'm not saying that we could tell if it was some sort of giant flying saucer, but even from what we had, it looked odd. Very odd. But we were professionals working at one of the most prestigious scientific institutions in the world. So we'd need a hell of a lot more than looks really weird before calling the press or the government. This was my discovery, so I sent Bill off to scrounge some time on an infrared telescope, which should give us a better idea of exactly how big this thing was. Then dispersed the rest of the team to see if they could get anyone else to confirm what we were seeing. Even the boss deigned to stop by and congratulate us on the unusual find, probably with visions of a budget increase dancing before his eyes. But to his credit, he did offer to speak to the James Webb Space Telescope, JWST people, about taking a peek at whatever this thing was, but I wasn't going to hold my breath. Meeting adjourned, I turned around to find we had attracted a small audience from across the office, most of them just admin staff trying to rubberneck a potential discovery in an otherwise dull day. I can't say I blame them. Organizing meetings and paper deliveries at NASA is no more interesting than doing it anywhere else. But then I spotted someone I knew. Joanne was a radio astronomer who we'd worked with in the past and who did good work. We got along well, despite her being 20 years my junior, so I beckoned her over, partly to see if she'd ever seen anything like this before. She hadn't, but she did have an idea. "Want me to point a dish at it and see if it's transmitting?" she said, with half a smile. We both knew the chances of it doing anything like that were practically zero. "Sure, can't hurt. At least, then, if anyone asks if it's beaming out, 'We come in peace,' we'll be able to say no." I honestly didn't think any more about it that afternoon, too caught up sifting through the mountain of paperwork our discovery was generating. I had even been asked to prep a preliminary press statement, and went home that night, trying to work out the best way to balance laudable scientific modesty with much more satisfying self-aggrandizement. But at that point, this was an interesting discovery, nothing more. At best, it might transform my life and career. At worst, it might get me a glowing end-of-year review and maybe a raise. But I still wasn't convinced it was going to change the world. So it was with some surprise that I arrived the next day at 6 a.m. sharp to find Joanne standing by my desk, clutching a wad of data printouts. She was scared, really scared. Fear's not an emotion you see around here that often. Sure, if there's a crewed mission that's having issues, people might get a little unnerved or worried. But no one looks like they're about to drive home and build a bomb shelter in the backyard. "You're kidding me, right?" I said, knowing that she'd only be here for one reason. "The thing's transmitting?" Without saying a word, she laid out the data plots on the table. It's been a while since I worked on radio telescopes, but even I could see what was so startling. Instead of the broadband, fuzzy distribution of most natural signals, this was narrowband, and the signal was being modulated rapidly. "It must be man-made interference of some sort," I offered, trying to sound confident. "A comm satellite probably passed in front of the dish, or a pirate radio station decided that this was a great morning to go on the air." She just shook her head. "It's been transmitting steadily for hours, and the signal is only from that tiny patch of sky." "Has another dish had a look at this yet?" I persevered. "You could just be the victim of a very localized form of interference. In fact, until we get corroboration from another source, that's still the most likely answer." "I know. I've got a video meeting with 2 other observatories in an hour. If you're right, then we'll find out soon enough." She still looked shaken, so I offered to attend the meeting, partly as moral support, partly because this object, whatever it was, had been found by my team, and I wanted to be in on every discovery. So, at the appointed time, I was sitting next to Joanne in our small conference room, awaiting our esteemed guests and trying to maintain the composed grace of a future Nobel laureate. Then the screens flickered to life and the 2 professors appeared. And for the second time that morning, I saw facial expressions completely at odds with my expectations. Wonder, excitement, joy, any of those would be appropriate for what I had just seen on those plots. But instead, they looked annoyed. Not angry, just annoyed, maybe even bored. It was the sort of look you give a waiter when they've presented you with the wrong meal for the second time in one night. "Good morning, and thank you for agreeing to have a look at our mysterious source on such short notice," began Joanne. "It is simply—" But before she could continue, one of the attending astronomers, a white-haired man in his 60s, cut her off. "It really is not very mysterious at all. In fact, the only mystery is why you issued an urgent request for verification. It is neither artificial, as you suggested, nor is it located inside the solar system." The other figure looked a little more sympathetic, but nodded along just the same. "We had to pause some time-sensitive work to observe this signal, and I'm disappointed that you failed to conduct even the most basic analysis to rule out common radio sources. It's a narrowband, clearly modulated signal," exclaimed Joanne, having recovered from her initial surprise. "I accept that terrestrial interference might produce a signal like this, but not an astronomical source. It's probably just a highly unusual pulsar," added the second man in a conciliatory tone. "A find that will probably make an excellent research paper, but perhaps not one that required an urgent corroboration request." "Yes, it's most probably a pulsar," agreed the first man. "But I've already wasted too much time on this wild goose chase. I have real research that can't be delayed any further. So unless you have another message from ET to share with us, I will bid you good day." I was dumbfounded. None of this made any sense. The data looked nothing like a pulsar. Even I knew that. And besides, a highly unusual pulsar wasn't just something you dismissed as commonplace and moved on with your life. It was the sort of discovery that careers were based on. "Can you at least send us the data you observed so we can compare it with our own results?" asked Joanne. The white-haired man nodded curtly. Then his screen went black. "Of course, we'll send you what we have. I hope it turns out to be something interesting in the end," the second man added, in the tone of a kindly nursing home worker who has just been informed by a resident that they were, in fact, Elvis, before he, too, vanished from the screen. We just stared at each other, completely lost for words. Under normal circumstances, I should have been furious, but the exchange had been so weird that I just couldn't muster any kind of coherent response. Their explanation for the signal was so wrong as to be absurd, and the speed at which they ended the meeting was unheard of for a serious scientific discussion between leading experts. I mean, they were on a call to NASA, for God's sake. Most people would give the institution some respect, even if they thought the two of us were wackos. "What the hell just happened?" I asked. "I have no idea. I can't even begin to list all the things wrong with that meeting." Joanne's eyes narrowed, and she looked down at the paper plot, still on the table in front of her, its lines still as unambiguously artificial as before. "Do you think—" She hesitated. "Do you think someone told them to brush us off? I mean, if this is what we think it is, then I can only guess who might be involved now." I thought about it long and hard. No. If someone had told them to shut up, they could have stalled for a time and come up with something more convincing. But all they've done by feeding us this load of bull is make the whole thing even more mysterious than it was before. And I don't know about you, but they seemed completely genuine to me. Out of their minds, sheer, but genuinely so. They really believe that this signal is natural, which I admit doesn't make a lick of sense. Joanne nodded. I thought so too. They seemed genuinely annoyed that I was wasting their time. But given what's just happened, what do we do now? Let's get back to my office. There should be data coming in from the infrared by now. I smiled. Even if the radio astronomers have collectively gone gaga, we should have plenty of other evidence that something's up. But once back at the office, I was shocked for a third time in as many hours, which for someone of my advanced middle age is not a good thing. My team was all back at their usual workstations, continuing with the same routine analysis that we had been doing before the discovery. Two questions sprang to mind simultaneously. One, what the hell were people doing abandoning the find of a lifetime? And two, who had pulled my team off the assignments I had given them? I think the second part annoyed me more, but at least the answer to that quandary arrived promptly in the form of my boss. He sauntered over, coffee cup in one hand, a file bursting with reams of paper in the other. "Bad news, I'm afraid," he announced, and I was surprised to see his usual unflappable bonhomie bore a tinge of sadness that my little triumph had fallen through. "Seems like it's just a regular old asteroid. Infrared data's in, and it's conclusive." He waved the file at me before gesturing to a dozen or so flashing message symbols on my monitor. I couldn't get JWST to have a look, but that's probably for the best given the circumstances. "Have you gone over it yourself?" I asked, again caught completely off guard by the morning's events. "No, I'll leave that to you. I trust your judgment. Why don't you spend the next day or so typing up the findings, and then we can get back to that machine learning stuff from Rubin." He deposited the file on my desk with a melancholy thud, then ambled off to tend to the rest of his fiefdom. I opened the file and began to read. It was mostly printouts, along with some brief summaries, and none of it made any sense at all. Every report listed finding a normal asteroid, and the conclusions were all identical. Not worthy of further consideration. Everyone had taken a look and decided that it wasn't worth their time. Over the next several days, every independent check produced the same impossible result. The object radiated heat at reactor-like levels, altered its trajectory without any visible propulsion, and began moving toward Earth. Yet each scientist who reviewed the evidence returned calm and dismissive. Their reports used identical language, not worthy of further consideration. By the time the projected arrival had fallen to less than 2 days, the signal had spread through observatories and research networks around the world. Everyone who studied it insisted there was nothing unusual to investigate. I just barged into the director's office, on your instructions, and showed him a trace of a pulsar. God, I've never been so humiliated. Even he could see what it was right away. I can't believe you convinced me to second-guess myself. Joanne, that's not a pulsar, and you know it. I was almost pleading with her by now, and we were starting to attract attention from the rest of the office. It's not worthy of further consideration, whatever it is. And I told you, it's Dr. Moreau. We are not friends. She brushed past me and stormed off, sending a crowd of open-mouthed gawkers scampering back to their cubicles. I was still standing stock still and staring after her when I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was my boss. "We need to talk. My office now." I followed dumbly, crushed by the enormity of what was happening, as he regarded me with his best, "I'm not angry, I'm disappointed" look. "You've upset a lot of people today, and more importantly, you've let yourself down," he began, as if I'd just smashed a keyboard over someone's head in a fit of rage. "Your bull-headed insistence on claiming some sort of extraterrestrial contact has dragged in the deputy director, me, and most damaging of all, Dr. Moreau. You saw how distraught she was." Now, I'm not saying you bullied her into going to the deputy director, but you should have considered your relative ages and experience when making your case so forcefully. I just listened, too dumbfounded to even argue. Now, I've apologized to the deputy director and taken full responsibility. So hopefully, Dr. Moreau's career won't suffer too much. But I hope you appreciate the reputational capital I've burned, trying to smooth over your actions. And I expect you to let this matter drop completely. Do I make myself clear? I nodded, not knowing what else to do. Good. I'll try to forget that this episode ever occurred when I write your end-of-year report. You can go back to your team now. I want you working on that stuff from Ruben. Oh, and your expense report is late. Please, complete it promptly. I skulked back to my desk, trying to avoid the sideways glances of my colleagues and ignore the whispered gossiping. The most important event in human history was in full swing, and all I could think about was my career and reputation. The signal trace was still pinging away on my screen, a mocking reminder of what had sparked all of this. I went to close the app but paused mid-click. The signal had changed again. It took a while to work out exactly how. Maybe I just didn't want to accept what I was seeing. But there could only be one conclusion. The object was heading towards us, fast, faster than any human object could possibly go. Handshaking, I grabbed a pen and paper and started to do some rough calculations. There were many things I had to estimate or outright guess, but in my heart, I knew it was coming here. And that made things easier. 2 days. That's how long we had before it arrived at Earth. 2 days to try to raise the alarm or run to the hills. I knew the first option was hopeless. I'd probably just spend what little time was left in a jail cell. And the second was just ridiculous. I was hardly what you would call an experienced woodsman. Honestly, I struggled to survive without air conditioning and a fully stocked fridge at the best of times. Then I thought about leaving early and heading off to a bar somewhere to drown my sorrows and meet the coming horror in a blissful, drunken stupor. But that didn't feel right either. It would be like abandoning my post as the enemy advanced. So I resolved to stick it out, watch the object approach, and take any opportunity that arose to help somehow. I'd probably just end up as hypnotized and oblivious as my colleagues. But maybe that was for the best. So here I am, dutifully filling out my expense report and wondering if I'll even go home tonight. The temptation to go completely nuts and yell, "The aliens are coming," is strong. Hell, I could even have a little fun with all of this. But at the end of the day, that's not me. I'm just a mild-mannered middle manager. So I'll stay here at my desk and await the inevitable. If you're reading this, then I hope you have some ingenious way of making this right. But if not, I just hope you find some meaningful way of spending the next 2 days. More meaningful than sitting in an office and pretending that everything is all perfectly normal. I stopped filling out the expense report. The cursor blinked beside the question, asking whether the purpose of my trip had been achieved. Outside the office window, the afternoon sky looked washed out and colorless. The object was less than 2 days away, yet the building around me remained perfectly calm. Phones rang, printers hummed, someone laughed near the elevators. Joanne stood behind me. I had not heard her approach. "You should finish that," she said. "It is coming here." She smiled with patient concern. "Nothing is coming here." I opened the raw signal again. This time, I did not look at the plotted waveform. I converted it into a sequence of binary intervals. and compared those intervals with the timestamps from every observatory that had received it. The transmission was not repeating. It was assembling itself. Each telescope had received a different fragment. Each computer had processed a different instruction. And every person who examined the data had supplied something the machines could not provide: a living pattern recognition system. Our brains were part of the decoder. The message was not being sent to Earth. We were building it inside ourselves. I checked the security logs. The original files had already been mirrored to weather satellites, university archives, news agencies, and public astronomy sites. Small pieces of the signal were appearing in compression artifacts, loading animations, and corrupted video frames. Millions of people had already seen some part of it without knowing what they were looking at. That was why the others were calm. They were not hiding the truth. They had lost the mental ability to recognize it as important. I pulled the network cable from my workstation. Every monitor in the room went black. Then they turned on together. Not the computers, only the screens. Across each display appeared a live image of the daytime sky. A dark shape covered an area larger than the moon, but my eyes kept sliding away from its edges. I could see the stars disappearing behind it. I could see clouds bending around something enormous. And every time I tried to focus, a warm certainty entered my mind. There is nothing unusual to investigate. People began standing from their desks. One by one, they walked to the windows. The same thing was happening outside. Cars stopped in the road. Pedestrians gathered on sidewalks. Hundreds of faces tilted upward. No one screamed. The office speakers chimed. A calm, synthetic voice said, "Attention. A routine atmospheric event is now in progress. Please remain where you are. Everything is perfectly normal." Joanne repeated the final sentence. Then everyone in the room repeated it with her. Everything is perfectly normal. The glass in the windows began to vibrate. I opened the recorder on my phone. I needed to leave proof for whoever might still be capable of hearing it. "My name is Dr. Daniel Mercer," I said. "I work at NASA. An artificial object has entered Earth's atmosphere. If you are listening to this, do not look at any image associated with..." The pressure behind my eyes became unbearable. For a moment, I saw the object reflected in the dark surface of my phone. It was not a ship. It was a structure made of nested openings, each one turning slowly inside the next. At the center was a darkness so complete that the reflection of my own face ended at its edge. Something inside that darkness noticed me looking. My fear vanished. Not gradually. It was simply removed. The object was no longer strange. Joanne was no longer wrong. The signal was not a warning or an invasion. It was a correction, a way of teaching the human mind which parts of reality it was permitted to acknowledge. I looked down at the recording. The file was still running, but the words on the screen had changed. Its title was no longer "Warning." It read, "Quarterly Status Report." I listened to the first few seconds. My own voice sounded relaxed. "My name is Dr. Daniel Mercer. I work at NASA, and everything is perfectly normal." Outside, the stars continued disappearing in the middle of the afternoon. I finished the expense report. For the question asking whether the purpose of my trip had been achieved, I selected yes. A signal can change what people are able to see. A mine can change who people are able to remember. So perhaps the strangest part of the next experiment was not that it broke the laws of time. It was that, when the traveler finally returned, reality seemed prepared for him. Story 3. There's a reason we haven't invented time travel. We built the machine from scratch, something that worked. A large rig which ran on time dilation, utilizing the controlled orbit of a miniaturized black hole. The only catch was that you could only go forward, never back. When it came time for human testing, most of my colleagues turned their backs on the prospect. My family had estranged me years before. Whatever life I had led, it wouldn't have meant anything if this machine didn't work. So, I ended up being the first one to raise my hand. There was nothing left for me here. Our plan was careful and calculated. Incrementally longer jumps through time. We would begin with minutes, then hours, and work our way up to days, weeks, and years. Ava, my only friend throughout this years-long endeavor, would stay in contact with me between each jump. I would report to control, calibrate how I felt, how the experience was, etc. She would, in turn, report our findings to the necessary authorities while I underwent the next jump. Earlier jumps went as predicted. I'd go in and out, usually within a few seconds or minutes, and find myself in the same coffee-stained office each time. I'd report to Ava, grab some snacks and a refill on my water, and head back into the pod minutes later for the next trial. There was definitely a tangible sense of dilation. I would go into the pod at 5 p.m., and coming out seemingly minutes later, it would be 6:30. Our initial calibrations seemed to be off by a few minutes, but it was nothing enough to lose sleep over. We'd just have to keep adjusting things as we went. Our confidence was great enough at one point that we tried our longest jump yet, 1 week in the pod, which would translate to roughly 2 hours for me. I was gone for a month. Ava's face had grown aged with worry by the time I got back. She told me that the calculations had been way off. Time inside the distorted field was stretching beyond what the initial models could account for. Each discrepancy was accelerating me through dramatically larger increments of time each time we booted up the machine. The next jump could be extremely dangerous for me. I didn't care. I told her to set the machine for 1 year. My life had already ended when my mother stopped speaking to me. I had to be remembered for something. Maybe it would be this. Ava fought with me for days. I reassured her that my calculations were correct this time. I couldn't tell her the real truth, that I hadn't planned on coming back. As the pod doors closed and the gravitational field engaged, I gave my goodbyes, treating them as though they really would be my last. Ava hugged me. It was the first time I'd felt one in 10 years. I waited in the pod, sizable enough for long-time travel with the accommodations you'd find in your standard RV. A bed, a small kitchen, a desk for work, and a refrigerator to store my meals. In the back, for those really long jaunts, a cryogenic life pod could sustain me for hundreds of years, theoretically. Minutes turned to hours, turned to days, turned to weeks. Something had gone wrong, as I predicted. My food began to run low. So did my patience, as I recorded log after log, my sanity decreasing and my claustrophobia growing. The ride did eventually come to a stop. The terminal inside the pod confirmed that I had been inside of it for over 200 years. Everything and everyone I knew was gone. I hate it, but I felt relieved knowing that. I stepped out of the pod and found myself surrounded by rubble. The walls had collapsed. The scorched rooftop gave way to a gray sky. I could taste rust on the roof of my mouth, and my eyes stung from the ashes constantly falling around me. On the pod itself were deep gashes and fire-blackened spots, someone having tried to bust their way inside. There were no remnants around me of what the project was, where it had gone. if any progress had been made or any papers published. And even if there was evidence of what I had done, what did it matter now? So soon in the future, it appeared as though the world had been reduced to dust. My contempt for the world I left behind only strengthened. For a few days, I explored the ruins, scavenging for what I could. A few cans of food that hadn't spoiled, bottled water that didn't taste clean. Every night, I returned to the safety of the pod, cooking myself meals on the somehow functioning stove and filling my computer with increasingly bored logs. It was the only sense of structure I appeared to have left. Nothing else mattered anymore. Nothing but whatever waited ahead. And I felt lonely. So, very lonely. Lonelier than I'd ever felt. I hadn't realized how bad it could get without a single person to talk to, even if those conversations were generally unpleasant for me. I missed it. The imperfection of my life. I felt like a fool for taking advantage of my time. After a few weeks, I sat down with my notebook, doing the math by hand, calculating the time I was losing, the way the pod's math didn't line up with the outside world. The dilation was worse than any of us had even considered. If I was going to get anywhere, I decided I couldn't do it alone. I was going to need help from whatever civilization rose from the ashes of these ruins. I would need to jump much farther. So I set the timer for 10 years, knowing it would likely be more along the lines of 10,000. I figured that someone would find me at some point, figure out how to stop the pod and get me out, and we would go from there. The machine booted up. I felt the strong pull of G-force as the inner chambers accelerated my molecules faster and faster until the field of time distorted around me. I ate for a while, read my own logs, weighed my options. It took me until I ran out of the last can of peaches before I decided to enter the cryogenic chamber. Gas filled it, putting me to sleep before a freezing cold overtook my body. It did not feel like I had been unconscious for even a second. I did not dream. I did not wonder. But I did wake up much sooner than I expected. When I woke, the chamber gave me a shrill warning. Power was low, an ambient red light surrounding me. I felt so weak. I could barely raise my arms to push against the glass. It wouldn't give. The interface simply screaming another warning at me about low pressurization and oxygen integrity. That's when I noticed I wasn't in the pod anymore. Surely the lights of the chamber would have shown me my surroundings, but there was nothing but blackness. No pod, no laboratory, no Earth in sight. All I could make out in the distance was the light of a few stars, long since dead, and quickly panning out of view. My chamber was spinning in the void of space. I asked the chamber how long I was asleep. It told me, in excess of 10 million years. I panicked. It did nothing but make me more afraid. I screamed. It did nothing but waste precious oxygen. Something moved in the dark, covering the illusory light of the distant stars. Only a faint curvature, a suggestion of shape. The form grew with the patience of something beyond infinity. The curve became paler as it came into the faint light. It was covered in creases and dimples and the occasional freckle. The ridge of a brow came into focus. Then two vast, still eyes, illuminated by the pinprick of light that was my chamber. A face, the size of a planet, its scale wrong in a way that made my mind fray. It drifted closer to me. I saw the texture of its skin, pores the size of lakes, scarring that stretched for miles. I could see now that it had a fixed grin on its face, as empty as its eyes. Yellowish plaque clung to the edges of its continent-sized teeth. My body curled in on itself, though my movement was restricted by the tight confines of the chamber. I could feel the cold of space seeping through its vacuum seals. The face radiated nothing. I begged it not to hurt me. It didn't blink or twitch, continuing its slow momentum toward me until the face was all I could see. Its nostrils looked deep enough that no light could escape them. Each strand of peach fuzz reached out like sea anemone, nearly touching my pod. I begged it to let me go home. My voice cracked. "Please," I would say, "please let me go home." I repeated the words until they lost their meaning, until they become incoherent sounds in the dark. The face did not answer beyond parting its teeth, its jaws unhinging. I could feel my chamber moving, pulled into the abyss that was its gullet. It came at me, fleshy dark, filling every direction until I was contained within a throbbing maw of blackness. I only caught a glimpse of the stars behind me before the mouth fully closed. The power to my chamber cut out right then and there. I woke up in bed the next second. The morning light edged through the curtains, burning my irises until I had the strength to look away. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Ava. When I went to pick it up to check what she had sent, my heart stopped. My hands were wrinkled, spotted. The skin hung loose from my bones. I stood and stumbled to the bathroom mirror upon thin legs that felt like they'd turned to dust with each step. When I looked at myself, all I saw was a man past his prime, aged beyond recognition, with stark white hair and a near-skeletal face. I checked my text from Ava. She wondered where I was. She said our first launch was in 30 minutes. 3 boundaries, 1 beneath a mountain, 1 between the planets, 1 at the end of time. Every witness believed the same thing at the beginning. If something could be measured, recorded, or photographed, then it could eventually be understood. But evidence is only useful while reality agrees to preserve it. So here is tonight's question. If every photograph, every official record, and every person you trusted insisted that nothing was wrong, how long would you continue believing your own eyes? And if you heard 3 knocks from inside your wall, followed by 2 more, would you answer? Leave your answer in the comments. Subscribe if you want to hear the next case. Until then, keep the lights low, keep your doors locked, and remember, the absence of evidence does not mean nothing was there. Sometimes it means the evidence was taken first. This is night evidence.